All right, so it's recording that for us, so that this is for those that aren't here. It would also help if you, as you followed along, you can take the notes on this, on the try thing, on the chart I gave you that you had for the dogs, where you put down your questions. But if you also wanted to open up your vocab, that would be good too, because we'll be talking about some of those words. You can probably fill it in as you go. There are some essential questions up at the top for you to answer. There are 3. But you'll have time at the end of class to do that, so that is your own call. Let's come back to here. All right. You're going to let me change slides? Maybe. So, what do you already know about the judicial branch? What powers does it have? How do judges get their jobs? How long is the term of a judge? Go ahead and take a moment to answer that. Your answers don't necessarily pop up on the screen. I'll be able to kind of see them later. And just kind of raise your hand on the Google Meet once you've supplied an answer to that. Oh. Let's see if there's a way for me to be able to see that the way you all see that. Okay, apparently not. All right. Matt, are you with us?
Yeah.
All right. And then this is student paced, so you can stick around here and think about what you already know about the Supreme Court. If you haven't already, you can open this on your own by opening it up by following the link in Canvas. So, all right. So first up, for your notes and some things that you might learn, Article 3 of the Constitution is what lays out the framework for the Supreme Court. It is the basis for judicial power. It's where we get the fact that federal judges serve for life, and the fact that Congress is the one who creates all of the lower courts. And the reason this is blue when they're usually red, if you click this, it is a link to Article 3 of the Constitution, and we'll get to that. We'll come back to that at another point. But we're going to talk about the court a little bit more first. All right. So, actually, you know what? I want you to see it. Let's see how it'll let me share the tab. Awesome, it did the thing. All right, so Article 3 is very short. It's in 3 sections, all of which are about just a few paragraphs, so like a page in total, if that. Section 1 literally just kind of states that there will be a Supreme Court. Section 2 looks at the kind of cases the Supreme Court looks at, and establishes is that the Supreme Court can allow things to move through the appellate courts first, unless it has to do with major constitutional issues. And then Section 3 has to do with things like handling treason, and the like. So it's not very long. It's one of the shortest articles of the Constitution, especially it is the shortest of the 3 branches. We'll come back over here. And so it leaves a lot to be desired in respect to what does the Supreme Court do? What is happening? I've been going the opposite direction. There we go. So if y'all remember from last semester, I had you read Federalist 78, all right? And it argues for an independent judiciary and life tenure of the judges. It also lays out ideas of judicial review, which is the Supreme Court's power to deem unconstitutional any law passed by Congress, signed by the president. Not in the Constitution, but laid out in Federalist 78 here by Alexander Hamilton. So our better part of our understanding of the court comes from this Federalist paper. All right, and we've already looked at this, so this part's a review, but the single most important Supreme Court case that you can know is Marbury versus Madison, 1803, because that is the case that establishes judicial review as a power of the court. If you want to know more about the details of the court case, there are some great YouTube videos that you all should have already seen that last semester, so I don't want to talk about that. But I really just want you to remember, as the Jefferson administration takes over, the power of the court essentially comes into question, and the idea of judicial review is the result of the case. Yeah. We already really went over that. All right. So, looking at the federal court system, so not just the Supreme Court, but the lower courts, and some basic terms at that. So the first term I want to look at is original jurisdiction. Essentially, it's where does the case start out? The first court to hear a case has the original jurisdiction, and the Supreme Court has right of original jurisdiction if it so desires. Appellate jurisdiction is essentially once a case has been ruled upon, it can be appealed to a higher level. And so this is how most things involving issues with the states and legal constitutional things are solved. Like it'll happen at one of these lower court levels and work its way up to the Supreme Court. In most cases, the Supreme Court gives original jurisdiction. Something happened. I made one of those noises. Gives original jurisdiction to district courts. All right. And so the United States is broken into many districts, all of which with their own court systems. The Court of Appeals, the Circuit Court of Appeals, have only appellate jurisdiction, and they represent the majority of like court cases that happen in the United States. Most things don't get beyond that level. And then the last one is inherently the Supreme Court, which has both appellate and original jurisdiction with whichever it so desires or is necessary. Why is it doing this? There we go. It doesn't like to change slides. It's really weird. All right, so the Supreme Court gets to choose which cases it hears, especially when it has to do with appellate jurisdiction. I have what's called the Rule of Four, and this is an informal rule. It used to be the Rule of Five in the very, very early days before the Supreme Court had a physical building. But that was changed to be, I think my mouse is disconnecting. I think that's the problem. That was changed to the Rule of Four, and this is to prevent a majority on the court from being able to control everything that is heard or isn't heard. So if 4 judges want to hear a case is heard. It has to be heard. If a case is agreed to be heard, It gets rid of ceratory. Sorry, I'm terrible at pronouncing Latin. Always have been. Ceratory, I think that's how you might actually say that. And when they get that writ, lower courts provide all the documents. This writ is only issued if the Supreme Court agrees to hear a case. This isn't required by any part of the Constitution. This is just the way that the court operates on tradition, essentially. Ooh. So how to get your case to the Supreme Court. So a lot of people think that like if they have some horrific legal issue that they have a right to take it to the Supreme Court. And while to some extent they do, the likelihood of them getting there are very, very slim. So you get to the Supreme Court by, you get 2 of the 12 circuit courts to rule differently on the same issue. So when you have the different lower courts ruling differently, the Supreme Court will often take up the case. This has to do with the Supreme Court trying to create uniformity to federal law. Remember, the 14th Amendment requires that the law be applied equally. The federal government can petition to have cases heard, and usually the court honors such requests, except for in rare cases. Anytime that there is a significant civil rights or civil liberties questions, the court will often take up the case. And then if there is significant social and political interest. So we'll talk about tomorrow about the legitimacy of the court and its balancing act between trying to stay apolitical while also staying relevant and hearing the will of the people and hearing what people have interest in, what has social significance. This next one is a vocab word. You may want to write it down in your notes. It's justiciable. Judicial. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I think justiciable is correct, but don't quote me there. And simply put, it is whether or not a case can be decided by the Supreme Court. If you decide to study politics, you'll look at a handful in college. You'll probably encounter many court cases where the court simply rules they don't have the authority to rule on it, or it's not an issue they can rule on, but they'll agree to hear cases where that's their final ruling. So not everything the Supreme Court will decide that it is even capable of looking at. If it doesn't ask some sort of constitutional question or involve a disagreement of 2 circuit courts at a lower level, if they decide that maybe it's a state issue, then they could rule that the case is not justiciable. And essentially, they'll use this a lot of the times to drop back and just not rule on an issue if they find that the issue is too politically charged. So it can kind of be a cop-out in a sense. Standing to sue, often referred to as just standing, is essentially the answer to whether a court case is justiciable. So if it is justiciable, then it has standing. So which means the court is able to hear it. All right, so the way it works. Briefs, before a case is even heard, once a case is decided to be heard, these are the written arguments for a case. Amicus curiae is our friends of the court. These are all interested parties in a case, and they will submit written arguments before the court. So oral arguments in the Supreme Court are incredibly limited. Most all of the information is presented in writing from any concerned parties. This is where interest groups and grassroots organizations, private citizens, other lawyers, other judges and whatnot can present their cases. The designated representatives, the lawyers representing the 2 sides of the case, do get a chance to present their arguments orally. They get 30 minutes. That is it. To present their case out loud. And they are super serious about this. While you're speaking, there's a little white light, like a little incandescent bulb. It's a white bulb. And as long as the bulb is white, you're good to keep talking. And once the red bulb comes on, you must quit talking. Doesn't matter where you're at, your 30 minutes are up. They won't hear anything after. Y'all still with me? Any questions so far? Thoughts or concerns?
I have a question.
Sure.
So, when you said that a lot of the times they ruled they didn't have the authority, was that them saying that it wasn't up to the judicial branch as a whole, or it was up to the local courts?
Yes. So, in many of these justiciable cases, the Supreme Court will rule that inherently, usually, most of these cases have to do with the court ruling that the issue is a state issue and that the federal government doesn't have any authority on said issue. They'll use the Ninth and 10th Amendments to say this isn't a federal power. Federal government has no position to rule here. And other times, yeah, they'll kick it back because they don't think they don't have the authority. And they think it should be solved by another branch of government. They'll say that it doesn't present two clear arguments. So therefore maybe it kind of turns into a legislative question or a question of regulation from the executive. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's both. Usually when they do this, it makes people pretty mad because people kind of assume that it's a cop-out. And they're not wanting to touch very politically charged issues. But there is a certain amount of weight to the Supreme Court not touching issues that it doesn't feel it has the constitutional authority to weigh in on. I don't want to get too much into that. That's part of our discussion tomorrow. So, yeah. So they've decided to hear a court. They've looked at their Curari briefs. Excuse me, goodness, my Latin is terrible. They've heard oral arguments. After that, they go to private discussions. So a lot of the functions of the Supreme Court are very quiet. It's considered to be like one of the most mysterious branches because a lot of what it does is not open to the public. And so when they go back to debate, they debate on their own as the 9 judges. And then they make written opinions. So the opinion of the court, also usually just referred to as the majority opinion, is how the majority of judges vote. So on the written opinions. Not a crazy definition. I think most of you could identify that. A concurring opinion are justices who agree with the majority opinion, so they are voting in favor for, but for different reasons. They may lay out different constitutional arguments. Maybe they disagree with the phrasing or they disagree with the sentiment behind the majority, but constitutionally they feel obliged to agree. We'll look at a case where there was no majority opinion, but rather a plurality of concurring opinions, which has become more common in recent years. That was an unheard of thing 30 years ago. Dissenting opinions. These are the opinions of the losing side. The minority on the court, they disagree with the outcome of the court. And there are a lot of thoughts on the value of dissenting opinions, and we'll come back to that here in a second. Per curiam, opinions are simply, they're like unofficial opinions. So they can either be made relatively anonymously, not really, but, or they can be the personal thoughts of the judge. So judges can add on like their personal thoughts in addition to what they think is the legal answer given the law at the current time. So they may rule in accordance with the law, but add on a per curiam if they disagree with the sentiment of the law, just to state that they, while they find the law unfavorable, they find it to be the case at the moment, constitutionally speaking. So going back to dissenting opinions, and I'm really kind of annoyed that my animation, I've learned today Paradeck eats slide animations, but I'll still ask my question. Since the dissenting opinions don't have legal weight, why do justices bother with them? What makes them important?
It's on the record that way.
Yeah, getting it on the record is probably their biggest point. The quote from Chief Justice Hughes in the 30s is probably one of the best quotes I've heard on this issue. Just that a dissent in the court of last resort is an appeal to the intelligence of a future day. So they're hoping to set a precedent to say that the court wasn't unanimous. This wasn't a questionless ruling, that there are still constitutional challenges to this ruling so it can be tried later on. Dissents are the foothold to try cases later on and are often referenced and used as examples for precedent in future cases. Dissents can also be used to push Congress to change legislation. A lot of the times that they'll rule that there needs to be changes made at the congressional level, and so they'll try and kick stuff their way. Ruth Bader Ginsburg kind of became very well known for her dissenting and her dissenting opinions. So if you want to know more about dissenting opinions, click the link and learn a little bit more about it. It's not very long. It's got a short video. Here from the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm thinking I don't like Paradeck. It's weird. How's it working on your end? How well does it show up any better, or is it like more fluid on y'all's end? Than like Google PowerPoint slides.
Mine must have closed out or something here.
Oh no. We are on slide 13 to 17, so we're almost done with this. When you get it reopened. So, checks on the judicial branch. You all are probably pretty familiar with the check that is judicial review, and that is the Supreme Court's check on the other two branches. But the checks on the judicial, there are many. One of the biggest being it has no police power. So it is stuck relying on executive and legislative branches to enforce and adhere to decisions made by the court. And because of Andrew Jackson, there is precedent to ignore court ruling. Like when it came to Indian removal, the Supreme Court ruled that removal was unconstitutional, and Andrew Jackson asked where the Supreme Court's army was. So that has held that forever weakened the authority of the court, while that something so bold in terms of just rejecting its decision really hasn't been tried since. It remains a realistic possibility. realistic in that it is completely possible, but unlikely. It is seen as being political suicide if a politician were to attempt this. So
So can I just ask something here?
Sure.
Say hypothetically, one of the half a dozen times that the court cited that repealing the Affordable Care Act during the Trump administration was unconstitutional. If Trump had just ignored that ruling like Jackson did with the Indian Removal Act, what would have happened?
that's what we call constitutional crisis. And the answer is yes, because the court has been so blatantly ignored before and nothing was done about it by Congress, there is that one possibility that the president can do that. As to what that would look like, I would argue it would probably be a reversal within the executive branch with how the Affordable Care Act is laid out, with the federal government ceasing to engage with it. I don't know what that would do to the various states. It would be a horrifically uncharted territory, and that's for sure. That would be when I probably have moved out of the country, just for fear of the ensuing wars. Like, I wouldn't want to be here anymore. I feel like things would go kind of crazy after that. But it's kind of like it is a political nuke. It is that it's out there. You can't use it, but you could use it. Like nuclear weapons. We all die if you use it, but it is an option.
I think that's actually a good comparison. It's the nuclear bomb in politics.
Yeah.
You can do it, but
once you do, there's no coming back, and the world will never be it won't be the same. And you could potentially accidentally destroy everything by using it. So while it exists, it's important to note that it only exists in theory. For the most, like, realistically speaking. And Hamilton talks about this issue to an extent, calling the Supreme Court the weakest branch because it has no ability to enforce its decisions. If y'all remember reading Federalist 78. Briefly looking at legitimacy. Actually, I'm going to skip that. I don't know why that slide's there. I don't like that. So I'm talking about legitimacy. Wow, Pear Deck just destroys my formatting. So just play along for a moment, because when I test it on my own, this animation still works, but when I go into like the student present form, it destroys my animations. Can someone tell me about the rule of 4? What does that mean if you were asked about the rule of 4? What does that imply? What does that have to do with? When it comes to hearing a case, how many judges are necessary to want to hear have to express a desire to hear the case?
Four.
There you go. It's not a trick question. It's 4. 4 judges. Is this rule found in the Constitution?
No.
Yep, no, it's not. All right. So there's some review questions. This is for your own study habits. Stop presenting for a second. Oh, welcome back. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move us over. I'm going to watch some pieces of the Supreme Court document. We're not going to watch the whole thing. You are welcome to. The link to the documentary is on Canvas if you are fascinated. I recommend this very much if you are interested in pursuing a career in law, that you have a good understanding of this. But I'm only going to look at like first few minutes, and then I'm going to skip to a chunk in the middle. So let's set now, A-Town, Supreme Court documentary. All right, and this is going to follow along more closely with that kind of adapted KWL chart that you had, kind of where you might find some things on things you really didn't care about when it comes to the court. But for your viewing pleasure, let's learn about the Supreme Court a little more.
And now, C-SPAN's documentary, The Supreme Court, Home to America's Highest Court.
This is riveting.
The Honorable, the Chief Justice and the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States.
Something different is going on here than what goes on in the Capitol building or in the White House, and you need to appreciate how important it is to our system of government.
This is the highest court in the land, and the framers created it after studying the great lawgivers in history.
The government concedes that the destruction of documents in anticipation of a proceeding.
One of these cases are very close, and you go in on the knife's edge. You don't sit here to make the law, to decide who ought to win. We decide who wins under the law that the people have adopted.
You will be surprised by the high level of collegiality here.
If there are 4 of the 9 of us who want to hear any of these cases, we'll hear it. We're here to decide things. The job is to decide. We decide.
We cannot have a decision of this court.
Why is it that we have an elegant, astonishingly beautiful, imposing, impressive structure? It's to remind us that we have an important function, and to remind the public, when it sees the building, of the importance and the centrality of the law.
It always thrills me, amazes me, and gives me faith in our country to know how much people trust the courts.
I think the danger is that sometimes you could come into a building like this and think it's all about you, or that you're important. And that is something that I don't think works well with this job.
Home to America's highest court, the role of those who serve here is to interpret the Constitution of the United States. Outside, almost daily expressions of protest are made by those wishing the court to take up their case or rule in their favor. And inside, a central space dominates its proceedings. All around, there are both public spaces containing the symbolism of the law and artwork reminding us of those that have served on the court before, as well as beautiful private rooms that are seen by those privileged few. But it is the justices, appointed for life terms, who have always defined this legal but very human institution and the building in which they do their work.
I think it's the prettiest building in Washington, and it's distinctive. It's a different type of marble, just to start with, much brighter, much lighter than the typical government building, which I think is wonderful because immediately, as soon as you see it, you appreciate that this is something different. It represents that the court is a different branch of government. And it really is more monumental. It looks a lot more like the Jefferson Memorial or the Lincoln Memorial in terms of its visual impact than it does look like another government building. And if you view it as something of a temple of justice, I think that's entirely appropriate.
When you first come up the steps from the sidewalk up onto the plaza or forecourt,
there are two candelabra on either side of the first set of stairs, and they actually have one of your first symbols, which is a.
All right, I'm gonna hop around for a second. Gonna skip forward a while, unless you all just really want to watch this whole thing. Yeah. Okay. Do chime in if you want to see more of this, but I figured I'd just show you some of the higher points of it. Excuse me as I scroll down to find the right tagline place. We'll come in here.
It would be very, very helpful.
All of the justices, all of my colleagues, have been extraordinarily warm and welcoming. Each one of them has offered advice. Each one of them has invited me to call them with questions. And I don't know if I can identify any one in particular that I've been turning to. Actually, it depends a great deal on whether I'm meeting them in the hall, because there's always a question on my mind. And when I meet them in the hall, I just go up to them and say, can you or would you? And they've each been delightfully generous in giving me time to walk me through whatever it is that I'm asking about. And so not just one person yet, but they've been all wonderful.
From its first Chief Justice, John Jay, to its current one, John Roberts, the court continues to make decisions that impact the lives of everyday Americans, taking on only a limited amount of cases per term compared to the number of those requested of them.
8,000 ask us each year to hear the case. That means about 150 a week. 150 what? 150 requests to hear the case. Well, here they are for this week.
Well, I think undoubtedly to my mind, the most, what shall I say, onerous and, for the most part, uninteresting part of the job is ruling on all of the cert petitions that come to the court. And they have increased enormously in the time that I've been here.
It's an interesting process. We don't try to just, look at the cases that we think are wrong. We don't look at the cases that we think have a lot at stake. Our main job is to try to make sure federal law is uniform across the country.
All the cases are hard. The only reason we take them, as some of my colleagues may tell you, is that other courts are in disagreement most of the time. And that means that other judges and other actors in the legal system have come to differing conclusions. Every case is that way.
Most people think they have a right to come to the court. For the most part, you don't. Not this court. Maybe the Court of Appeals, you normally do. Maybe the state courts of appeal and final, the courts that don't have discretionary jurisdiction, the courts of last resort, maybe they have a right to go to those. But here, most of our jurisdiction is discretionary. In other words, we decide if you come.
You can tell if there's a case that's on a particular hot button issue that people are going to give it a lot of attention. But I have to say that doesn't enter into our process of deciding. A lot of our docket is very mundane. You go through the year and we're deciding 90 cases, probably a half dozen are ones that are going to make it to the front page of the newspaper. All the others, bankruptcy tax case and Federal Arbitration Act case, a pension plan case. Those are actually a big part of our docket, all vitally important, but not anything that's going to attract any interest.
Even a case on a subject that you think of as kind of boring can turn out to be enormously challenging at the end of the day. It could be anything. So I don't think subject matter determines the extent of your interest in it. It's the challenge of solving this particular question of law and making it work. It could be on any subject.
Each one gets a vote, just like anything else, on what cases we should hear, but it only takes 4 votes to grant cert and decide that we're going to hear a case. The court used to have a lot more mandatory jurisdiction, cases they had to hear, and when they got Congress to pass a law saying that we didn't have to hear all the cases. It wasn't mandatory jurisdiction. Kind of the deal we made with the Hill was that you didn't need 5 votes to hear a case. 4 would be enough.
These are the
All right, so here's what we're gonna do. You go back to the module. Y'all still with me? Maybe. You go back to the module. There's a Supreme Court quiz. And actually, I think I set that up wrong. So go ahead and take that. If you click it, it'll take you to the link. And it'll ask you a handful of questions about the Supreme Court. Some of them are things we haven't talked about yet. Some things are from last semester that I didn't bother bringing back up this time. 20 quick questions. If you go through and answer all of them, it will give you a score, let you know how you're doing. I'm going to do terrible real quick because I'm just clicking back and forth. Nineteen and 20. Bam. And then you can see your score. I did not so great just randomly clicking, but I got 8 just randomly clicking. See what you know about the Supreme Court. You should want to get that score as high as possible, for the sake of being able to, get an AP credit. So I am going to let the documentary play. You all can take this quiz, and then if you don't want to watch the documentary, if the Supreme Court is not something you're fascinated in, you're free to go. Before you go, tell me how you did on the quiz. I didn't set it up for points, so just tell me how you did. This is for your benefit, but I am curious how you're doing on it. If you feel better about it, I could set it up as like a ranged question and make it a poll so you could respond. Actually, in fact, let's just do that. Start a poll. Option 1, 1 to 3. Correct. 3. We'll call 3, 2, 8. Correct. So are y'all with me on what I'm saying?
I think so.
All right, cool. 11. 14. 18, correct. And then 18, 20. All right. How did you do on the quiz? Once you respond to my poll here on Google Doc, on the Google Meet, you are free to go. And while you're taking it, I will let the documentary continue to play. Do y'all have any questions before we kind of slip into this more neutral mode of class? No. All right. I will say there is a vocab assignment for this week but we'll look more at that tomorrow once we've kind of covered everything I want to cover.
The cases in Justice Stephen Breyer's office that were granted and heard in the courtroom. Behind the scenes, each justice has their own suite of offices. Here they work with a staff of 4 law clerks and several office assistants. But it is within their own chambers where their personalities and work habits come through.
I did